Why is there a bulldog with a pipe in his mouth in front of us? What is that? What's going on here?
With ice cream and tamale on each sleeve.
Yeah.
This is a setup for what in a book is called Crazy California, what is known as programmatic, or I like to call it fantasy architecture. And
Fantasy architecture.
yes.
Okay.
And programmatic architecture is when a building, the shape or design or the picture of the building itself represents what's in it, or the fantasy aspect is represents some fantastical image. So the Brown Derby in Hollywood, the famous Brown Derby, which unfortunately has been bastardized and doesn't exist as a bowler hat anymore, represents a hat, and the name of the restaurant, the Brown Derby. So a bar you and I went to on our mid-October 2021 trip to LA, the Idle Hour represents a barrel, which represents a liquor barrel, which because it was a bar built in 1941 that served liquor, so it represented what was inside. So there's buildings primarily in Los Angeles from the 1930s through the, I guess, 50s, at least to World War II, that say a tamale. They're shaped in the shape of a tamale, or the 1933 group, the group that we'll talk about, who took over Idle Hour and revitalized this pup that I'll get to in a minute.
Yeah.
I'm getting there. But they took over Tale of Pup, which is a hot dog stand that used to be in two places. I think on La Cienega Boulevard in Los Angeles is one of them, that is in the shape of a hot dog. And guess what it was? A hot dog stand. So that's what we're talking about. Architecture. And also what we're talking about is car culture and Los Angeles in particular in the 1930s to 50s. And today we think about, if you want to think about it, programmatic or architecture or fantasy architecture, we can think about Las Vegas.
Yeah.
But historically, the roots are...
Although, ironically, if you were going to have that, then you should have a casino that looks like a slot machine.
Yeah.
But they don't do that.
Yeah, but Frankie's, you have a Tiki mug that looks like a slot machine.
That's true.
True. So you combine that.
So why were they so literal back in the day? Like, hey, if we're gonna have a hot dog stand, let's make a building that looks like a hot dog. Why?
Or they were
were
literal.
they just trying
fantastic.
to be? Were they trying to be clever? Or?
Well, yeah, I think like a dog smoking a pipe gets your attention. Now they don't serve dog food in there. Thankfully, they serve tamales and ice cream in a stand. But the idea was Los Angeles in the 1930s.
Yeah.
Was wide open.
Yeah.
So real estate was not at a premium yet. It was open, wide roads. The first American, if not world city, devoted and planned around car culture.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so, yeah.
Even though they had the red line and yellow line transportation system, something we talk about in this video when we visit the Formosa Cafe, which has a recreated red line car.
Yeah.
One of my favorite movies, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and the debate about whether the auto industry killed transportation in LA or whether it died of its own accord. So while it did have a transportation infrastructure, it also was dedicated to cars culture because LA was and still is, I guess, a string of towns, neighborhoods, suburbia, the long forgotten downtown we discuss on Broadway and other shows, but they're all strung together and they're cars. You have Wilshire Boulevard. One of the great fantasy, I guess, architecture pieces in around 1915 was right near where Tiki is today in Los Angeles at the Vista Theater. And at the Vista Theater was where D.W. Griffith did Intolerance and did the set of Babylon in the silent movie eras.
Wow. Okay.
And they left it up for over a year because it was such a great architectural piece. This is where Sunset and Hollywood meet in Los Angeles. And it was seen as there. And so the building methods from the Pan Pacific Exposition to do these fantasy architecture then, and the movie sets, even though movie sets were not necessarily meant to be permanent buildings. So whether it was chicken wire and plaster, or whether it was perfecting something that Disneyland also perfected, which is scale. That, the Disneyland buildings and scale, they look a lot bigger and authentic than they really are. That you can shrink them, but it all comes from cinematography, from photography. So you have the influence of car culture, fantasy architecture, movies, automobiles, and then the weather even, because you could have these buildings that were maybe not permanent, but you couldn't do a chicken wire and plaster building in the East Coast, as you know.
No, because it would snow. Or you'd get a couple of good rains. Actually, now I think about it, it's like we talk about like Tiki, like the total environment. It was very easy for, like, say, Don Beach or Trader Vic to create these environments because it was in LA. I mean, that's what people are used to doing. They're used to building movie sets.
Yep.
To make things look as real as possible.
Yeah.
So hence, So you need to have that dry California sun culture to not like have the weather destroy these buildings.
Right. And then the movie culture and my favorite character that talk a lot about when we talk today about the Tam O'Shanter is Harry Oliver, who was one of the first great and was nominated for one of the first Academy Awards for his design of movie studios, who did the Spandia Witch's Castle in Beverly Hills, which is a famous architecture piece, and also did the Tam O'Shanter Inn, who was a friend of Walt Disney. So, he embodies the architecture, and he was the great desert rat, meaning he was the great dropout before there were dropouts and hippies and all of that. He was just this amazing character.
You're completely right about the curiosity element.
Yeah.
Because that is what made me step inside my first tiki bar. What's going on in there? What's inside there? What's behind the door? And that also focuses into like this type of architecture.
Yeah. And like I say, it's a lot of fun because there's hey, I'm this bulldog selling ice cream and tamales, and you go, what the heck? I got to check that out. It looks like fun.
Yeah.
Or there's this blank telephone booth in a hot dog stand in Manhattan, and if at 6 o'clock you call, you get into a speakeasy, and what's behind that secret door.
Yeah.
And there's both of those elements that I'm just in the last month just intrigued upon. And so this is the public facing fun history of it. And another topic that you and I will get into in another video, but the Chinese restaurant and Tiki overlap. But think about the classic both Tiki bar and Chinese restaurant A-frame, and even neon that they used to use back in the day, and how that has such an attraction for a lot of us, right?
Well, we'll tell you what. Let's go on a little tour.
Okay.
And let's start off with the Formosa then.
Okay. We talk about themes, thematic restaurants. Well, come on, Chinese restaurants. A lot of them from Kowloon in Massachusetts to where we're at today, the Formosa Cafe. In terms of Chinese restaurants, design, architecture, over the top, creating a fantasy image. Formosa Cafe opened in 1939, and there's a movie studio across the street, so it attracted a lot of luminaries, a lot of movie stars. John Wayne frequented this place, as well as the Tam O'Shanter Inn as well, and Booth 15 at the Tam O'Shanter Inn was John Wayne's favorite, and John Wayne here. According to the Formosa website, John Wayne was caught in the kitchen making scrambled eggs after he had passed out from drinking at the Formosa one night. Formosa Cafe has recently been renovated by the 1933 group, the same group that did Idle Hour that we've also visited. I have not been inside since the renovation, so I'm really excited about it. That's why I'm all decked out here. And the other thing they've renovated and restored is a 1940 red car train. And the red car was the interurban transportation system from Los Angeles that was torn down in the 1950s and was the subject, along with the yellow car, which was within, I think, Los Angeles, the train system of one of my favorite movies, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, as well. So Ray and I are going inside. We're going to have some Chinese food, some drinks, and look at the wonderful renovation of the Formosa Cafe. So we're going to go from the Idle Hour in the Valley that we've discussed to the Snow White Cottages in Los Feliz, Franklin Hills in Los Angeles.
The Snow White Cottages.
Snow White Cottages.
Now, this was the inspiration for Disney to create like the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Is that right?
So these cottages were there, not part of the Disney Hyperion studio where Disney invented Mickey Mouse, but also the epic movie that really put them on the map in Hollywood's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Yeah. But they were there they were built shortly before or at the same time. And it said that some of the people who did the inking and coloring of Snow White in the mid-1930s, around 1933 and 1935, rented out the Snow White cottages. And clearly when
meta.
Yeah, exactly.
were they dwarves too?
Probably not. Although, or whether they were required to sing hi-ho when they went off to work. So we're here in terms of programmatic architecture, a site we're also visiting on our Disney sites. And like the Tam O'Shanter Inn does double duty because this is the storybook style of architecture, which is considered a programmatic architecture. Harry Oliver's Tam O'Shanter Inn, and then the Witch's Castle, the Spendia, I think it's pronounced, house in Beverly Hills. This is most famous. It's called the Witch's Castle in terms of Harry Oliver's storybook style. This was not Harry Oliver, but built in 1931. Nearby the Snow White Cottages, near where Heidi, my better half, and I used to live in Los Angeles, is the Shakespeare Bridge.
What's the Shakespeare Bridge?
And the Shakespeare Bridge is a bridge in the neighborhood that Walt Disney had lived in and frequented in the 1920s and 30s that spans over Franklin, the name of the street.
Yeah.
And it's, I forget why they call it the Shakespeare Bridge, and it's just a fantasy bridge. But we were able, for old time's sake, since this is a stroll down my memory lane, to go underneath the bridge where I used to live, and then go on top.
Literally, you literally lived underneath this bridge.
Yes, we were the trolls under the bridge, is what I like to say. And on top of the bridge, and it just has a nice little, I don't know what the architectural style is, but a nice little fantasy element to the bridge, and was a bridge that Walt Disney, who lived a block and a half away, and Roy Disney, his brother, used to frequent and travel over after it had been built. So, again, part of the Disney mythos, but also part of the fantasy architecture. And frankly,
why fantasy architecture or create this style for a bridge? Because you're not trying to sell anything. You're not trying to draw any people in.
But why not? Because you have the means to design something that's fun and aesthetically pleasing. Why?
Do you think? Okay, all right.
But
it still fits into this fantasy architecture style.
It does. It does. And frankly, it's just frickin' self-serving because I love that bridge because it's a symbol of my wife and I's first home together. So damn it, I'm going to shoehorn it into this video come hell or high water.
I think it'd be funny if I just kept on like hounding you. Like, so explain to me, Stephen, why exactly is this programmatic architecture? Well, no, why is that? I mean,
because I freaking like the bridge,
I want to put this bridge in this video.
And I did, twice.
All right.
So let's go. So we're underneath the Shakespeare Bridge, which in our Disney episode, if you watched that recently here in LA, is just a block and a half from Disney's and Walt and Roy Disney's Lyric street houses. The reason we're here is because it's not programmatic architecture, but as we go to the top and Ray and I look at that, you'll see it's a bit of fantasy architecture from the 1920s, right near Walt Disney lived, right near Disney Studios. Probably had an influence on him, although unfortunately, contrary to local legend and belief, the scenes from The Wizard of Oz were not filmed on this bridge. But the movie Dead Again by Kenneth Branagh had some key scenes that were filmed on the bridge. And it's close to my heart and my wife's heart because the first home we bought together was one house away underneath this bridge. And so this was my neighborhood for 7 years in the late 90s and early 2000s. So now we're on top of the Shakespeare Bridge, built again in the 1920s, all decked out for Halloween on this very bright and frankly very warm October day here in Los Angeles. And as you can see how it fits with the fantasy storybook architecture, and is also the neighborhood that Disney lived in, so may have had an influence on him, even though, as I said before, too bad The Wizard of Oz wasn't filmed here. But other things have been filmed here, and it's just a terrific little bridge. So during our trip, we went and had at least I loved my prime rib lunch at the Tam O'Shanter.
I love mine too.
Yeah.
And this, and the thing is about this place is it was supposed to be like a Scottish.
Yeah, it was, I think, originally built as an English, and then it became more Scottish, because Tam O'Shanter is the name of the Scottish hat. Building, built by Harry Oliver, who we mentioned earlier was the great silent movie, and then I guess later in the talkies until 1941, director, but also designer of fantasy architecture, storybook architecture also, we call it in LA, like the Snow White cottages or the witch's castle that he designed. These are called storybook architecture, like out of a grim fairy tale storybook. And so the Tam O'Shanter checked a lot of boxes for us. Yeah. We have a Disney connection that we discuss in our Disney tour episode. We have the Harry Oliver, who I just look for every chance to talk about, because he combines all of these elements of Los Angeles, and I like the atmosphere, and finally the history.
Yep.
Oh, and actually, finally the food.
What I find interesting about this building is that at my first blush of looking at this place, to me, it's like, it just looks like an older building, an architecture, a style of architecture that's obviously before my time, right? Mm-hmm. And it isn't until you brought up the point, it's like, well, no, this building was built specifically to look like an English or a Scottish. What the chateau?
The chateau's awfully highbrow.
No, but it just, to me, it looked like an older building. Mm-hmm. But the idea was that we are going to create this building from a different time and a different place, mm-hmm. from a different country. Mm-hmm. It was intentional. And so even to that level, I think what's interesting about this whole fantasy architecture thing is that it doesn't all have to be hot dogs, bulldogs, and tea kettles. It could be a focus on a particular style of building, mm-hmm. whether it be something like this place that we're going to go visit next, or like a tiki place like the Mai Kai, where it's like an A-frame. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. It's actually, it's all psychology, really. I mean, when you think about it, it's like the idea of like the reasons why they're making these things and why they were successful. Because obviously these places were successful of bringing people in.
And I'm glad you use the word psychology, because that...
Marketing, but marketing is psychology.
But the psychology, but that brings us all the way full circle to how it ties with Tiki, escapism, the psychology and the feeling. So, and the Tam O'Shanter, I hope you agree, had a really interesting feel to it as we enjoyed our meal. So we're at the Tam O'Shanter Inn, and in terms of programmatic architecture, this is one of the famous places that you might go to, you might see. It was established in 1922, and it was designed by a Hollywood set designer and art director. His name was Harry Oliver. Harry Oliver was known, and if you look on his Wikipedia page, there's a reference for his atmospheric settings and controlled environments. So for those of us Tiki files out there, that sounds pretty familiar. And so you see the interrelationship, why I'm a huge Harry Oliver fan, because even before Don the Beachcomber, he wanted to create environments, and a lot of it was influenced by Los Angeles, because the other reason we talk about programmatic architecture, and we'll also talk about it in a related show on Walt Disney and Los Feliz, was the influence of Los Angeles in the movies, because Harry Oliver created movie scenes that were very realistic for its day, and many famous movies in the 1920s and 30s. And he was nominated, although I don't think he won, for one of the first original Academy Awards for his set and art direction and design. And so the Tam O'Shanter Inn, as you'll see, looks like a medieval faux Scottish pub. You can see from this angle how it relates to the programmatic architecture, and we'll show some old-fashioned photos to show it was even more ramshackled in the 1920s. And in fact, the more ramshackled it was, the more authentic it looked from the outside. So when we talk about programmatic architecture in Los Angeles, one of the factors is cars, and that the idea that the architecture, in the case of the Tam O'Shanter Inn, where we're at now, is storybook architecture, is to draw people in and advertisement for the establishment. What's also interesting is part of car culture is a lot of the entrances, including at the Tam O'Shanter today, is in the back, in that the edifice is in the front to drive you in, but you come in the entrance in through the parking lot, not through the front door on the street, which is a very Los Angeles way of approaching buildings and restaurants. And in fact, here at the Tam O'Shanter, it's said to be the first drive-through restaurant in America, although it's no longer a drive-through restaurant. It's a sit-down restaurant, and Ray and I are sitting down because I'm getting hungry.
So what decades are we talking where the fantasy architecture was its most popular?
I would think from the late 1920s, 30s, into the 40s, and I think World War II, to some degree, the Great Depression knocked it off. But then, of course, World War II, I think, changed everything. And then we move into, in Los Angeles in particular, this is the Googie coffee shop architecture. Yeah. We move into mid-century modern. Then in the 1950s, Las Vegas picked up the mantle from Los Angeles. Yeah. In terms of the architecture. So, and...
do you think, I have a couple, as we're talking about all this, I have a couple theories. One thing I think of is... chain restaurants started to become more and more of a thing. Yeah. Like, you got to think, like, there was a time where there was one McDonald's. Yeah. And back then, you'd be like, well, what's McDonald's? What's McDonald's? Or, well, it's a hamburger joint. Okay, fair enough. Fast forward to now, everyone knows what a McDonald's is. Everyone knows what a Pizza Hut is. So I guess the whole thing is, like, you don't really need to show, like, hey, we sell burgers here, because you already know what we sell at these places. So do you think what kind of killed it was, like... Familiarity, or maybe another thing too is like what I'm thinking about all this, and you're talking about like with the Googie architecture is like there is a beach town over in Wildwood, New Jersey, right? Mm-hmm. And it has, they call it doo-wop architecture over there.
Cool.
It's the
I
same.
love that name.
It's the same style of architecture, like this mid-century, modern, space age, like all combined. And literally, this place, this town, is just filled with hundreds of these hotels.
Cool.
And they were all themed.
Love it.
They were all themed, right? Mm-hmm. But I bet you, after a certain point, it didn't really matter. Because there was just so many hotels, and you're like, yeah, I just need a hotel room when I go down to Wildwood for the weekend. And I bet you, I wonder if, for lack of a better term, do you think the novelty wore off with people?
Yes, the novelty.
Because it is a novelty.
The novelty wore off, but also, and what you said, think about too, and I'm just thinking out loud here, the changes in the environment beginning in the 50s. You had the interstate highway system.
Oh yeah,
knocking off the Route 66 and the
that is what killed it.
Highway.
That is what killed it, because I mean, as a road warrior that has driven across the country many times, you get on the freeway.
Yeah, TV, advertising,
yes.
So standardization nationwide when advertising and TV, I assume, went from local to also national and local.
Yeah.
So a McDonald's, you know what you're getting because, you know, as a child of formative years in the late 60s and early 70s, it's all the Ronald McDonald and the TV commercials, and the arches represent something. It wasn't the unique one-offs, right?
Back if you're talking about the 20s and the 30s, it ain't like you're watching TV commercials on your TV.
Right.
Because it wasn't invented yet. And if there was a radio, your radio wasn't like something that was like something you can. It was this big ass thing that was bigger than my television growing up in the 70s. That you had to, everyone had to sit around, and maybe there'd be an ad, and who knows how much it would have cost for an ad.
And let me tie this into something else we discussed in a number of these Southern California episodes. Is Disney too, and Disney brought Disneyland in particular, and then the other theme parks brought this fantasy to a crescendo, if not perfection, but a crescendo.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So you look at that, but now a number of us are, both ironically or not ironically, however you look at it, are back looking at that history wistfully and frankly loving the bad old bulldog. You know.
Yeah.
So who doesn't love a Bulldog Cafe that sells tamale and ice cream? I mean, I certainly would want to go there, and we did at the Idle Hour.
And if you don't, then those people probably aren't watching this video. So let's go to the Formosa.
Okay. Although I thought you were going to go Formosa last.
Well, you brought it up.
Okay, fair enough. Sorry, I ruined an elegant segue for the.
Well, you created a new segue.
Yeah. So much for. All right.
So again, can you explain to me why that bridge is in that?
Because I freaking like it, Ray.
Why is this stupid bridge in this video?
Because it means something to me, Ray. I love that bridge.